Joining us tonight to join in the debate, talk about the Spitzenkandidat debate that we saw earlier, we have William Dartmouth. He's a British MEP, independent MEP with the Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy Group. And also joining us, Jennifer Baker, an EU policy journalist and founder of BrusselsGeek.com. So
Good
guys,
evening. Good evening.
Watching that, okay, let me ask each of you, what was your favourite moment, William?
Well, I think that my most depressing moment was when Frans Timmermans announced that he was going to tax aviation fuel. So that is the end of aviation in Europe and possibly the end of Airbus as well. And it amazes me that Mr. Timmermans, who's been Vice President of the Commission for the last 5 years, doesn't seem to realise the implications of what it is that he's suggesting. Hopefully he won't get elected.
Okay.
No political bias.
No, not a bit. I'm going to stay with the tax issue as well. My favourite line of the night was Margaret Vestayer's, "For me, a tax haven is someone where people pay their taxes." I mean, that question...
I thought it was brilliant.
It was a very good line. You know, she showed her class there, I think. But that was the digital question, which we always knew was going to come up, and we always knew she was going to knock that one out of the park. So I think it was kind of interesting to see her dealing with the climate issues and kind of going up against Scott Keller on that, discussing that. But also, I thought what was quite interesting is there was some quite nice coalition building bits of it, where they
already
didn't all attack
it.
Yeah.
Well, they need to. Better than the Frans Timmermans joke about Alexa.
Oh, we've heard that so many times.
We've heard that many times. Anyway, instead of talking about it, let's have a look back at some of the highlights of tonight's debate. Here's a recap of what they all had to say.
Good evening, Europe. Welcome to Eurovision debate. There is just over a week to go before Europe goes to the polls in the European Parliament elections.
Our question to you is, given the fracture, the tensions we see about migrations, would you, as a Commission President, drop the efforts to find a common solution? And if not, how do you solve the problem?
First of all, I have to say that I would never repeat the same mistake like the current Commission by introducing mandatory quota, which unfortunately didn't work and which unfortunately only deepened the divide between eastern part and western part of Europe. I believe that we should find another solutions. We should respect the sovereign right of governments and parliaments in member states to grant or not to grant asylum, to grant or not to grant temporary or permanent settlement or even citizenship.
But really, what is absolutely unacceptable is what's happening right now in the Mediterranean. People are drowning, and we know where they are. They are calling the search and rescue center. No one is picking up the phone. The Italians are telling them to call the Libyans. In Libya, no one is answering the phone. There is a civil war in Libya. There is no coast guard. And we're even giving to those militias, which call themselves coast guards, support. This should not happen. We need to have a European search and rescue effort.
Well, let me recall that immigration is first and foremost a human drama, and I'm actually the son of an illegal immigrant. My parents arrived here without any documents, and more than 30,000 people have been killed in the Mediterranean. 50 people were killed just yesterday in the Mediterranean when a boat capsized. And I think the European Union has a great responsibility here, and all of the policies that have led to destabilization need to be
well, we seem to have a little technical gremlin with that tape, but we will try and get back to it a little bit later in the programme and sort that out for you. People already getting in touch, though. Someone using hashtag #RawPolitics, and we do want you to get in touch on Twitter or indeed Facebook, saying, pity none of those candidates on these issues. We're going to actually connect with the EU citizen. And in part, that was the purpose of tonight, was to try and connect with EU citizens. But many people, now I've seen criticism all over Twitter tonight, that they're using, all these acronyms that no one quite knows what they mean, talking in this kind of Brussels language that no one quite understands. And so there isn't that connect.
They're not accessible still.
I think that's probably still true. Unfortunately, I think that's possibly the nature of the beast. You have it here in the European Parliament. I mean, I was up there in the hemicycle. People weren't all that switched on up there either. I mean, there was kind of sort of quiet sighs when some of the sort of, if you like, bingo cards phrases came out. And yeah, that is a problem. That is genuinely going to be a struggle. At the same time, you've got to ask, who is tuning in to watch the Spitzenkandidaten debate around the EU? It's people who are basically EU nerds, who care about it, who really want to be involved. And to those people, they may well grasp a little bit more than your average, Joe sitting at home.
But isn't the point? Sorry, just to pick up on this, William. But this does matter. I mean, obviously you're from the UK. Britain's leaving, but the argument that Brexiteers make time and time again is that all our laws have been made in Brussels. So any form of democratic accountability is actually rather important.
It's very, very important. And the argument against it, I mean, one of the reasons I was in favour of Brexit, indeed still am, is because of this complete lack of democratic accountability. Now, I think one of the problems is that all the people we saw there tonight, I mean, they're all, let's face it, they're all insiders, and they all speak in these acronyms. I mean, I spent 5 years of my life working in corporate America, and I never thought I'd ever come across so many acronyms ever again. Wrong. When I got to the European institutions, it's all full of acronyms, and they're all designed to exclude people, actually. They're all designed to exclude people. So it is hard to understand what's going on, actually.
One thing, though, that...
But there is a slightly more important point, which is that with a single and honourable exception of Jan Zahradil, who I know of, and I think I've just mispronounced his name, pretty much all these candidates are agreed on the main outline of policy. All these candidates, all these other candidates use the term solidarity, European solidarity, over and over and over again in different contexts. Well, there's a whole world out there.
Well, what's wrong with solidarity?
Well, that doesn't European solidarity, that doesn't subscribe to European solidarity. That's my point. That doesn't subscribe to European solidarity. And that wasn't represented there at all. And maybe that's another reason.
But one thing, though...
Williams may not be standing again, but he's continued to campaign.
He is. But, okay, one thing, though, that all the candidates seem to have agreed on, because everyone is using the word, we have to reform, we have to change, we have to retune, renew, all these words of changing. No one seems to want to keep the status quo. Is the status quo that bad now in Europe that this is the main problem?
I mean, I think to a degree all those people represent the status quo. I mean,
which is interesting that they all want to change it.
Yeah, I think change is just one of those buzzwords. I mean, we even have to go back to the Obama era to see change as one of these. It's just a sloganeering term that I think everyone feels the need to trot out because voters get switched on by the idea of change, even if they deep down know no change is ever really going to be delivered because it's still the politicians who are going to get elected. That's the thing with politics. It's run by politicians. And I do think what we saw tonight was... Yeah, it was 6 elevator pitches. It wasn't really a debate. I don't really think it was connecting with anyone on a really meaningful level. Out of the 6 of them, I think Frans Timmermans probably did the best at that because he kept referring to what people said to him when he was out on the campaign trail and what he hears, which at least gives some sort of reflection that, well, maybe he's actually meeting people.
Right.
But the others, you get the impression that they're just meeting amongst themselves.
OK, I think we have a caller already. So we have Ken from Newcastle upon Tyne. Ken, what is your question? What did you make of what you saw between those 6 candidates there?
Well, I would like to comment. I have never heard of a debate in Britain in the House of Commons because they're always exactly the same formula. They always state their position. But that is not my main point. My main question really is how do the candidates suggest we deal with the Brexit issue?
Well, it is interesting, of course, it didn't come up tonight, and in fact, actually, someone else has tweeted in saying, have the candidates avoided the Brexit theme, or did they just forget about what a mess is happening
are you talking to me?
in London? Sorry, Ken?
Is that gentleman talking to me?
Yes, carry on, Ken.
I can't hear. I was misled. I began watching the Euronews, the debate after 9 o'clock because I thought it started at 9 o'clock. So I don't know what went before that. But
there was a time difference there. Pick up on that. Just to pick up on what Ken's saying there, I mean, it wasn't really brought up. In some ways, it was quite refreshing, though. A reminder that actually not Europe is all dominated by Brexit.
Well, I mean, first of all, Ken, if I may presume to call you Ken, has actually made a great point. The other thing is that, as a British citizen, it was actually rather a relief to have a whole hour and a quarter discussion of politics, and I'm afraid I was there nerdly taking notes without Brexit mentioned once. But there is a serious point there. Most companies, or let's say it's an advertising agency, they lose their second biggest client. It does cause a little bit of, self-questioning. And there was very, very little self-questioning there. And I think that's one of the problems. And I think that's one of the problems with this sort of disengagement which is around. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Ken, just to bring you back in again, if you're still there.
Yes.
You say you're surprised Brexit wasn't brought up, but is it a reminder that actually there are a lot of issues in Europe and Brexit's maybe dominated for too long over the last couple of years?
My problem as a pro-European citizen is there's only one issue. Whether these wretched Brexiteers get their way, and people like Nigel Farage, who are anti-European and anti-British, how do we deal with that?
Okay, well,
let's get William to answer that.
Well, I think that's a slightly loaded question, but I would just gently point out two things. One is that we have had a referendum. If you think the referendum should just be ignored, that's a very interesting idea. And the other thing, and this is much more key and a rather more original point, is that there's a distinction between being anti-Europe and anti the institution of the EU and think that it's centralised too far. Now, even Timmermans, who's the classic insider, and he's been Vice President of the Commission for the last 5 years, said that it ought to be reformed. Now, people like me, and there's a lot of us, have taken the view that it hasn't been reformed and is unreformable. But I think, with respect, Ken, that you had a dazzling insight to start off with, slightly less dazzling insight to follow up with, if I may say so.
Well, let's, on that point, let's leave it there, Ken. Thank you very much indeed for calling in. Lots of people tweeting in already. Gordon saying, hey, what show we don't get a vote for the E-Commissioner, do we? How can you talk about democratic accountability? I think having a slight pop at what I was suggesting earlier on. Lots of other people get in touch also saying, why will it be the end of EU aviation if kerosene is taxed? We'll be picking up on that and indeed much more after the break, where you get in touch, though, beforehand. Pick up the phone or, indeed, use social media, #RawPolitics. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We are on our red sofa and we're hoping to speak to Italian people.
La situazione italiana riguardo l'economia è molto difficile.
The borderless Europe makes their life easier, especially for those who live in different countries.
We can travel and it's free and I really like it.
Culturalmente no hay apenas diferencia, de verdad.
Another issue here in this part of Europe is a train line. It's very politically sensitive.
It's the missing link of the Mediterranean corridor.
They are looking at the valley like a transit area.
Well, most of the people we spoke to say that they are going to vote, but they don't think that this is going to make a positive change in their lives.
Well, let's continue driving and see what else we find out.
World leader of luxury expeditions. Pona.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call, where we're having a late night edition after that debate involving the candidates who want to take over from Jean-Claude Juncker, who want to steer the direction of the European Commission over the next 5 years. We want to know, even if you weren't watching the debate or if you were, what you made of it. Were you convinced by any of them? We want you to get in touch. Please do give us a call. The number, slightly changed tonight, is 0032. It's a Belgium number. 22830283, or indeed email us, RuPaul@Euronews.com. Pick up Skype.
Yeah, we'd love to see you. As you always say, we need more Skype callers as well.
Or indeed use hashtag RuPolitics on Twitter and Facebook. People are tweeting in already. I think we've got Alex saying that, I think it was you.
It was Jennifer who said this.
Jennifer has made a good point, saying that those that tune into debates and tell Europe are probably EU nerds and professionals. The question is, how do we make EU election debates more mainstream? We'll be touching on that.
We will be. And I think an interesting comment also is someone asking, why don't we get to vote for EU Commissioner? You talk about democratic accountability. That's from Gordon. OK, we'll also touch on that. But first of all, let's go to our team in Lyon, The Cube, who's monitoring social media for us. Let's head over to them.
Hello, Tesa. Hello, Darren. This is theCUBE, our social media centre, right in the heart of Europe. And why does social media matter? Well, I'll tell you, because you get a sense from this who was watching. You had a tweet there where somebody was saying, maybe it's just the geeks and the professionals. Well, I can show you here. This is a map of where the official hashtag Tell Europe made the top trends. That was the most popular topic on Twitter. You can see through this belt of countries here. But look, trending in Ireland, but not the UK, which, by the way, is leaving the European Union. Or is it? That's a whole other debate, isn't it? But look, Eurosceptic Italy, fair to say, the rise in the popularity of Matteo Salvini's party there, not trending at all. No mention there. It's not trending in Poland either. Yet countries like Belgium, it was the top trend. Spain right up there as well. So you get a sense from this who was talking about this, and that gives you an idea of who's engaging with these kind of big EU debates. So for those who were watching, who do they think won? Let's just bring you up some people's takes. Well, Dominic had a rather, I think it's fair to say, balanced view. He thinks that Frans Timmermans was way out ahead as the winner of tonight, saying he was experienced, clear, and also that Manfred Weber seems to be struggling. But for other users, it wasn't the men who came top. Miguel here saying it was Margrethe Vestager and Ska Keller who were the best in the field. So that's what some people are thinking. But come with me, let's look at the social profiles of the candidates themselves. This is CrowdTangle. It analyses how much impact people are having. And look, this is of the last month. Frans Timmermans, you could say, perhaps engaging the most on Facebook and on Twitter. There's a race for third place, but look here on Facebook, very different compared to Manfred Weber here, second on Twitter, but he is way down in fourth on Facebook. You get a sense from this which politicians are engaging the most, but what about the parties they represent, the entities people vote for? Really interesting for me. Look at this. On Facebook today, the party that's had the most engagement, the third most engagement, is a party that wasn't even represented at the debate. That is the Europe of Nations and Freedom. That's the Eurosceptic party. So you get a sense from these numbers, who's got the most engaged user bases. The question, Darren, the question, Tesa, is how they're going to be able, or if they're going to be able, to translate this kind of popularity into votes on polling day.
All right, thanks for that, Alex. And I think this is the big question on engagement again. And someone else actually agreed with you there, Jennifer. She says, I agree, Vasileios Katsardis there, I agree with Brussels Geek. None of the candidates during the debate could actually relate to the normal people and actually understand their problems. Well, this is the reason why we're doing the show as well, to hear what
normal people on the line.
Voters, yeah. So, OK, let's head over to Italy. We have Gerolf from Murano in Italy there. Gerolf, what did you make of the debate? What stood out for you, and what's your question?
Yes, Georg or Giorgio, as I come from the only town in the world with a 50-50 relation of German speakers and Italian speakers, Merano, in South Tyrol, the northernmost province of Italy. I am rather a Europhile nerd, as you might call it, and I like the whole debate very much, especially in comparison to some channels we get here from Austria, from Germany, and from Italy, all very well done professionally.
Who do you think won the debate?
Member of the BBC German language service, but they are just focusing on internal politics, and it's so boring, and it has nothing to do with
we take the compliments fine, we'll put those in the bank. But on the debate tonight, who do you think came out on top? Who's got your votes?
Well, I agree with those who say Frans Timmermans really looks presidential, but my personal best would be Margrethe Vestager. especially when she's decisive, she's clear, and especially when she said, don't give so much space, even as media guys, to those right-wingers, to those nationalists.
Interesting that they're both current commissioners as well.
Indeed, and campaigning. Thank you very much for that, and thanks for the compliments. We'll definitely take more of those. Let's go to Victoria, who's on the line from Brussels. Good evening, Victoria. What did you make of tonight's debate? Who managed to convince you, if any of them?
Well, I have to say they were all a bit bland, but if I had to pick top two, it would probably be Timmermans and Schaukela.
And why is that? Why did they come out on top for you?
I believe more in the things that they were saying, and sometimes they managed to say things with a bit of a spark behind their eyes, whereas the others were speaking a bit like robots.
But before you watched the debate, did you already have this similar opinions, and when you watched it just reinforced your opinions, or did anything change?
I was thinking that I would be more in line with GUE, actually, but I wasn't that impressed.
Okay.
So I get the impression, though, that you kind of almost feel that something was missing, that maybe the criticisms that we've seen on social media tonight, that actually their inability to relate to ordinary Europeans was quite evident.
Yes, and I mean, for me, there was one thing missing. Everyone was talking about rule of law or democracy or, taking back control. But in the end, many of the big parties, but I'd say also the fringe parties like UKIP, are receiving dark money from dodgy sources. And for me, this has a corrupting influence on our democracies. And nobody was talking about any of this. Nobody mentioned the influence of money in politics. And the way that basically overturns democracy and shuts out the citizens completely.
OK, Victoria, thank you very much indeed for that. It is interesting, again, that people always feel that in these debates that actually their point of view isn't necessarily reflected in what they hear.
Or it's an outside-looking-in kind of feeling.
Well, I think possibly we should discuss a little bit the format of this and where those questions came from, with kind of these 3 blocks of 3 questions. And I mean, I don't think that really helps. There was a social media element, but none of those questions that people were tweeting in, obviously cared about, were then translated and put to the candidates. And look, I know here at Euronews, we put a lot of work in behind the scenes. We know how difficult it is to set up an event, particularly a big live event like that. But really, I feel like it could have been more dynamic. It could have had sort of citizen engagement.
Feel like a debate,
it didn't feel like a debate. It felt like 6 elevator pitches with the occasional cards that they were using not very well, to be quite honest with you. I mean, you do see one thing Britain does very well. It's got a question time programme where members of the audience are there really hammering home questions at the politicians, and they are on the spot and have to answer. It would be so refreshing to see something like that for the Spitzenkandidaten process, if it even continues.
William, just very quickly on that.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think the day will come, perhaps, when these candidates will be brave enough to take unmoderated questions from the audience, but perhaps with a chairman. But it's very difficult to do. And just in terms of who did best, if I may just say this, I thought Margaret Vesica, who I've read about, never actually, but only seen a couple of times, was absolutely a class act. But she never said anything of real substance.
Okay.
Whereas, oddly enough, Jan Zahedil is less adroit in English and so on, but he said the most interesting thing.
But also, you kind of agree with him, with his point of view.
It's not then exactly kind of agree with him.
Do you agree with William, or indeed, what do you think? We want you to get in touch. The lines are still open. Please do pick up the phone. Give us a call. The contact details are on your screen. #RawPolitics, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes with more highlights and indeed more discussion on tonight's big debate here in Brussels. Stay tuned.
Some say that we're born into this world alone, but we're not. From the second we come into this world, we're in it together. Each of us can leave a mark, but together we can make a real difference. That's what Europe is all about, and that's why we vote.
Unique European elections coverage. Your voice, your choice. Raw Politics, your call. Coming up on Euronews.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call tonight discussing the big debate that's taken place in the European Parliament between the League candidates who want to replace Jean-Claude Juncker as Commission President in a process that in itself may not well proceed forward, but one in which they set out their political agendas. We're going to have highlights of what they said a little bit later, and we also want you to get involved. We want you to pick up the phone, get in touch, or use the hashtag Raw Politics. And that also includes Adam Walder, who's tweeted in saying it looks like we're in a Chinese restaurant waiting for the food to arrive on our rotating table plateau. I can tell you, we're in the basement of the European Parliament here in Brussels, and we're not expecting any food anytime soon.
Okay,
but thank you for your concern.
And just to quickly remind you of the number, it's +32 22 830283. All right, before we continue, let's get a quick news update from our team in Lyon with Isabelle Kumar.
Good evening, Tesa and Darren. These are our headlines. And as you've been hearing, climate change, foreign policy, the economy and migration. The contenders for the EU's top job have gone head-to-head in a special Brussels debate. Answering the Christchurch call, 26 countries and tech giants have pledged to prevent online extremist content. The United States chose to stay away. And activists in the US have vowed to challenge Alabama's attempts to ban abortion, including pregnancies from rape and incest. Legislation to restrict abortion rights has been introduced in 16 states this year. And those are our headlines. Back to you in Brussels.
Isabel, thank you very much indeed. There is a full news bulletin coming up in, half an hour's time at 11:30 Brussels time.
All right, and I think what we talked about this earlier in the Raw Politics show, the fact that there are no populists, actually, when populism is such a big issue in these in the EU elections, is the fact that there are no populists really in the debate part of the reason why it wasn't as dynamic or didn't raise the issues that should be raised?
Yeah, that's kind of a difficult question because I don't know then whether you want to give platforms to people just to liven things up. I mean,
to represent.
Voters support these people, please. You know,
sure.
It's a significant slice of public opinion. You may not like it, but it is.
Well, I mean, these candidates here are representing the major groups. So, I mean, by size in the European Parliament. So, you know, I think that's a fair enough. You have to draw the line somewhere with who do you have on and who do you not have on. I mean, I've been reflecting during our ad breaks and during our news and kind of thinking, you know, maybe politics is boring for a lot of people. I mean, because maybe that's what causes people to switch off. And I don't want to see a sort of a dumbing down of this sort of debate at the same time as thinking...
But we do have a lot of fun in the Raw Politics house, don't we?
We do. We do. It's
I meant the debate. I don't mean politics.
It's not all...
No, I mean politics in general.
May I perhaps make a different point?
Sure.
You actually just said these people represent the major the major groups.
Yep.
True enough, but the EPP lost 53 seats last time. They're on track, according to the polls, to lose another 41 seats. The S&D are on track to lose 30 seats. I mean, the two big groups which have dominated the European Parliament, basically run it since its inception, are number one, losing. It'll be 100 seats down from 2000 in the case of the EPP.
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly true.
And they'll lose their grand coalition, which has basically been running the place. Now that's a very interesting story.
Yep.
And also that's maybe. That is maybe why these debates are a bit dead.
Exactly.
Indeed. Well, if this debate happens again, it might look very, very different in 5 years' time. But speaking of the debate, let's actually watch some of the highlights of what went on in Brussels a little bit earlier this evening.
Good evening, Europe. Welcome to Eurovision debate. There is just over a week to go before Europe goes to the polls in the European Parliament elections.
Our question to you is, given the the tensions we see about migration, would you, as a Commission President, drop the efforts to find a common solution? And if not, how do you solve the problem?
First of all, I have to say that I would never repeat the same mistake like the current Commission by introducing mandatory quota, which unfortunately didn't work and which unfortunately only deepened the divide between eastern part and western part of Europe. I believe that we should find another solutions. We should respect the sovereign right of governments and parliaments in member states to grant or not to grant asylum, to grant or not to grant temporary or permanent settlement or even citizenship.
But really, what is absolutely unacceptable is what's happening right now in the Mediterranean. People are drowning, and we know where they are. They are calling the search and rescue center. No one is picking up the phone. The Italians are telling them to call the Libyans. In Libya, no one is answering the phone. There is a civil war in Libya. There is no coast guard. And we're even giving to those militias, which call themselves coast guards, support. This should not happen. We need to have a European search and rescue effort.
Well, let me recall that immigration is first and foremost a human drama, and I'm actually the son of an illegal immigrant. My parents arrived here without any documents, and more than 30,000 people have been killed in the Mediterranean. 50 people were killed just yesterday in the Mediterranean when a boat capsized. And I think the European Union has a great responsibility here, and all of the policies that have led to destabilization need to be revised.
I think, first of all, every time a person dies in the Mediterranean, Europe loses a bit of its soul. So we're losing who we are. We're losing our values by not solving this problem. Secondly, once people are on boats in the Mediterranean, you have to take care of these people. And you shouldn't put fines on fishermen or other people in other boats who rescue people at sea, like the Italian government is doing now. That is unacceptable.
Our second question is on youth unemployment.
European countries have come together to make sure that in every country there is an offer of education or training or a specific job. Because with no job, you just open the door to no future. And of course, it's a very good point that we need a strong economy. We need to invest. We need to make sure that businesses can do business and grow. And we see jobs are being created in Europe. I think more than 12 million jobs over the last 5 years. But a lot of those jobs, they don't pay very well. And we should agree that we should promote an economy where you can make a decent living when you have a full-time job.
Well, first of all, when I'm in Portugal, young people in Portugal ask me, when Antonio Costa came with plans to create more social justice, to create more jobs, to create more economic growth, and the European Commission said, go ahead, Manfred Weber said, no, punish Portugal, punish Portugal. So that's the question I get.
So we all share that solidarity is a key issue for Europe, but again, responsibility. And on responsibility, I have to remind everyone that in the last 5 years, it was Commissioner Moscovici, a socialist, responsible for the programming on the Euro question. It was Dijsselbloem, a former colleague of Frans Timmermans as minister from the Netherlands, who was chairing the ECOFIN, so the Euro group, which did the necessary decisions on reforming. And today, it's a socialist finance minister from Portugal who is chairing this ECOFIN group, the responsible body, the Euro group, the responsible body who is doing the necessary steps. So I think everybody should take over responsibility. The socialists should not attack their own policies.
Do you think we have to make these sacrifices in order to protect the planet, our planet? What would you do more, or what would you do less? Please name concrete proposal.
But I think we can make the most of it by looking at it as an opportunity, because millions of jobs can be created. For instance, building high-speed rails in Europe to connect our cities, to make sure that people can get around, out of the planes, down to the trains. That is very specific, that can work.
I do think we have great differences among the groups, among the parties on the climate issue, because some only talk about the climate and others, we want to do something about it very concretely. So my very concrete question to Manfred Weber is on that. If you're saying emission trading is great, then why did you vote, personally, why did your group vote against reforming the ETS and making it actually workable? Right now we're giving out so many free certificates that they can go for free and even trade the certificates among themselves, the very big companies.
Exactly. Because my party is a party who's trying to bring things together. We can be ambitious, and that's the job of the Greens in a way, to be very strong on climate change. But again, I had a meeting with the trade unions, not with CPP voters mainly, with trade unions, socialists, who told me, if you implement the goals of the Greens, then we have no future for our jobs. And that's why let's be sustainable. Sustainability from the United Nations means ecological ambition, also economic stability and also the question of sustainability in the technological fields. Bring things together and not split them up.
So that was a snippet of the debate earlier, the highlights of that, debate between, we can call debate, between the six
series of speeches,
lead candidates here for the top job in Europe. All right, let's go to a caller. We have one from Frankfurt, Germany. Alpay, you're on the line. So which of the six candidates on stage do you think won that debate?
Good evening. I think Timmermans actually was rhetorically the strongest, but I'm probably still going green.
You're still going green. Why is that? Why do you like Timmermans but will still vote green?
First of all, I'm pretty uncertain whether any of these would ever actually make a big change, because in the European Union we got so many different ideologies or dogmatas, and in recent history we haven't seen a lot of change. And so, I mean, Timmermans was rhetorically very strong, but I would still go green because that's an existential crisis we're facing right now. And
so what's driving your vote is really the climate crisis. Is that what's really driving your vote?
Yes, I think that's what should drive every vote.
How do you feel though that no populists, as people would brand them, were on the stage tonight? That actually the full array of opinion, like for example you might well get in Germany with the AfD, that none of those parties weren't represented. Surely that's not good for European democracy.
I think you should give everybody their voice, and I think if they're represented in the parliament, as soon as they are, they should actually get a voice on the stage. But before that, I think it's not that necessary.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Alpay, from Frankfurt in Germany.
It's interesting. Everyone seems to think that Timmermans won.
Yeah, in terms of the way he speaks and brings out his own. But it's interesting that he didn't change his mind on who's he's going to.
Well, that is also true. People do say these things. They may well think someone's won, but it's a different thing to converting someone's vote. OK, on that, we still want you to get in touch. We've got about 50 minutes or so left on air. You know what to do. Pick up the phone. It is indeed a Belgium number, but now that they've capped the European Union of cap numbers. It's +32 2283 0283. Email us at rawpoll@euronews.com or tweet us using the hashtag #RawPolitics. And we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
This election year, I'm travelling around Europe, starting the day with MEPs, sitting down at their favourite morning spots for a tasty talk about their vision for Europe. Join me for Breakfast with Belle on Good Morning Europe.
Some say that we're born into this world alone, but we're not. From the second we come into this world, we're in it together. Each of us can leave a mark, but together we can make a real difference. That's what Europe is all about, and that's why we vote.
Climate update in collaboration with Copernicus.
Last month was the second warmest April on record, with above-average temperatures over most of the globe. In Iran and other parts of the Middle East, the unusually wet spring caused continued flooding. Southeastern Siberia, Central and Eastern Europe were drier than average. The warm and dry conditions increased the likelihood of wildfires that swept through the Transbaikal region in Russia, parts of Sweden and the UK. Mozambique was hit by the second devastating cyclone in 2 months. Dozens of people lost their lives and more than 20,000 have been made homeless. The melting of land ice and thermal expansion of the ocean led to a continued rise in sea levels, threatening coastal communities around the world. Over the past 25 years, global sea level has increased by about 8 centimetres.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call here in the basement of the European Parliament, where we're still waiting our late-night food delivery. But we're also waiting to hear from you. Please do get in touch. #RawPolitics.
All right, and before, we still have time for one more check-in with our team in Lyon with the Cube. Alex, what do you have for us now?
Hello, Tessa. Also waiting for some food this end, if that's going around. But anyway, yes, when it comes to social media and the social media angle, a lot of people, really interesting perspective on all this. Look at this. People saying, I don't understand. There's a debate going on, but we don't get to vote for the next president of Europe. Other tweets as well saying, well, unfortunately, we actually don't get a vote for this. A lot of confusion about what your vote means, what it does, where it goes, and who you're voting for. Otherwise, you might just be looking at a stage full of people and thinking, what's going on? Well, that's certainly what we're seeing on social. Let us just help and sort of break it down, because the European Union is known for many things. Simplicity isn't always one of them. So let's just bring you what we can on that. This is how it works. You, when you go to the polls, vote for a party in your country. You vote for a party. The party that wins, parties are part of groups. These are political groupings in the European Parliament. The biggest group gets to put forward their Spitzenkandidat, that is the lead candidate, the people you saw debating on stage today. The biggest group puts forward their candidate for the top job. That is how your vote, via this process, influences who gets there. It is true, you do not directly get to vote for these people, named and name-checked on your ballot paper, but by voting for parties that belong to their groups, you are helping them, should you want to, make it across the finish line to be potentially the next president of the European Commission. Now look, couple of caveats here. A lot of debate about this process going on in Europe at the moment. Debates about whether it's democratic, whether it's too complicated, but this is how it works. So in answer to those tweets we've been seeing, you do not directly get to vote for the next president, but your votes all add up in this big process, and eventually, it would seem, one of those candidates or one of their colleagues will be making it across the finish line. Back to you.
All right.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex. And Alex, I don't know if you're still there. We got a question asking us why we're always talking about Twitter and Facebook and not talking about Instagram, TikTok and Snapchat if you're a first-time...
I actually don't know what TikTok is.
TikTok.
Great question. Well, I don't know what the answer is to that one.
We will find out why we should be reflecting other social media outlets on this programme and indeed on these debates as well. But we've got other people on the line, the old-fashioned telephone calling us in. Who are they, Tessa?
Let's bring in Martin from Niger. And Martin, you wanted to talk specifically about migration there. So we heard the different candidates with their points of view on migration. So what do you have to say? Can you hear us, Martin?
European. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, please go ahead.
Good. And I've been working on the migration and asylum issue for 35 years. And one of the questions of Ken before was about Brexit, and the candidates talked a lot about populism, which is kind of a main theme to be addressed by a lot of politicians. And the reason I'm calling is because I heard again a lot of dismay about people dying in the Mediterranean. Now, I have two questions. The first one, or two propositions/questions. The first one is those people who rightly deplore the situation, have they helped us with a workable system? Have they really looked at what it means when people cross the Mediterranean and what needs to be done with them?
Okay.
Because the reason I raised the question is because I think not enough thinking, at least among politicians, has been done.
All right.
And secondly, before working in Niger, I worked in the Netherlands on the same job, basically.
Okay.
And there I must say I have noticed that the European, let's say, practice of asylum and migration in general has actually enticed people to cross the Mediterranean.
So there are two parts to your question.
Let me finish. Just let me finish to make it very clear. Right now we have people from both sides of the debate claiming that somebody is responsible for the deaths, but it's still not clear who is fully responsible. And I really plead that, particularly that's why I mentioned Brexit and the populism at the beginning. I think it really deserves deeper thinking. I'm not going to elaborate here and now, but I find the question is big and it still lacks a workable answer.
It is big and complex indeed, but it is interesting, and thank you very much for that, Martin, for that point, because the issue of migration did come up, and this constant message, I think, actually, that Frans Timmermans made, which is that Europe's future is tied to the future of Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting. There was, I mean, that this is coming up, and that sort of Weber as well. I mean, in one of the few points of his that actually stuck in my mind, because not a lot of what he said did, was that he said, he wants a commissioner to sort of to look at this, to look at Africa, to focus on what can be done from an aid point of view and a development point of view, rather than just purely, crisis migration management. And I think it says a lot about the way Europe is turning more broadly than just within this kind of political cycle or this political debate. And I think that's probably welcome. But, as Martin says, there's been a lot of talking and maybe not a lot of hard thinking.
There's a lot of resistance also in different member states on getting on board with an EU-wide response. I mean, that is the crux of the matter. It's been the same for years.
But in fact, can we go back to what Martin said? Because Martin obviously really knows his stuff. Martin asked the question of is it a workable system? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no, it's not. Has a new system been arrived at?
The asylum system.
Well, the system as a whole, I think he meant. I say that. And has that system been solved in the prepared sound bites of the 7 candidates? The answer is no, it hasn't. And Martin also said that this whole process needs much, much deeper thinking. And Martin is 1,000% right on this, actually. And there's too much heat and not enough light. There's too much emotion. Okay. This is not a subject.
I think we can't solve the migration.
And it can't be solved that easy.
No, absolutely not.
Let's get another caller on the line. Dennis is calling in from the Netherlands. Good evening, Dennis. What would you like to see? Who do you think won the debate tonight?
I'm not about to win the debate, actually. I just want to give my 5 cents. I saw Frans Timmermans talking about CO2 taxes for big polluting companies and saying that this money then could be used for normal citizens to do something with their houses or something. But in the end, Frans Timmermans is an educated man. He knows how economics works or how companies work. They won't take the bill for CO2 taxes for themselves. They're just going to put it through to the consumers at the end. So the consumer is going to pay for the pollution, and then he's going to get his money back to do something about his housing. And I think this is just misinformation. I think it's a lie.
To your point, Dennis, I think the big question on environment is who pays in this transition. It's in an ambitious transition to a greener policy of the EU.
Dennis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dennis.
Just very quickly, because we're running out of time, is this debate tonight going to change anything? And will it matter in 6 months' time?
I don't think so. I think we talked about how they were speaking sort of to themselves. And let's remember, they are actually speaking to the people who will appoint them, who are the political groups, who are the politicians.
So that was their audience?
Yeah.
One word.
Quick one.
Will it change anything? Yeah. Well, it actually might, because Timmermans is committed to aviation fuel, which is quite a dramatic thing.
OK. It's time now for tonight's last words.
I should have said it, but anyway.
And tonight's last word comes from Tom Nuttall, who's from The Economist. He says that he's pretty damning, actually. Not all the candidates are terrible, but this is a depressing debate with candidates who probably won't get the job, promising to execute powers the office doesn't hold.
Wow.
That's pretty damning of the debate. Yes. We will leave you with that thought, though, at least.
Mull it over.
What he thinks. But we'll have to see how this process plays out over the next couple of months. Of course, there is a special meeting of the EU Council 2 days.
Thank you to our guests and thank you for joining us this evening.
Have a good night. We'll be back at our usual times tomorrow. Goodbye.
Bye.